The transport trucks ground to a halt just after sunset. Huddled in the cargo beds were a group of exhausted German women, clerical staff, auxiliaries, and medical personnel, captured during the chaotic retreat across France. They stepped down slowly, shivering in the evening air, uncertain of their fate, their uniforms caked with mud and the grime of days spent marching. A line of American soldiers stood waiting, silent and watchful, observing the prisoners with the cautious professionalism drilled into them since basic training. Stay until the end, for what happened next became one of the most surprising moments in prisoner of war history. The women had been conditioned to expect harsh orders. They expected shouting. They expected the cruelty their own officers had promised would be inevitable the moment they fell into American hands. But instead, as the sergeant moved down the line checking their names, he heard something unforeseen, spoken so quietly he almost missed it. "We ate nothing for a week." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from absolute physical exhaustion. The American guards froze. Then, without a spoken command, one of them turned and sprinted toward the mess hall. The German women had no idea what was transpiring. They braced themselves for the worst. What they received instead would change everything. To understand this moment, we must look at the arrival. It was early winter, 1944, when the convoy finally stopped. Inside sat the group of German women clerks, medics, and communication auxiliaries captured after the collapse of several forward positions in France. They were exhausted. They were frightened. They had been marched, transferred, and shuffled for days with almost no rations. When the tailgate dropped, the women hesitated. Before them stood American soldiers, big helmets, heavy coats, rifles slung low. It was exactly the intimidating image they had been warned about. One private stepped forward and spoke simply. "You are safe now. Come, follow us." There was no shouting, no threats, just clear instructions. The women exchanged confused glances. Nothing about this encounter resembled the way their officers had described American captivity. They were led toward a long wooden building, the processing hall of a temporary POW camp. And inside that building, under the glow of flickering lamps, the atmosphere shifted completely. As the women formed a line, an American sergeant moved down the row, verifying tags, documents, and names. That is when one woman, barely able to stand, leaned forward and whispered the sentence she had been holding in for too long. "We ate nothing for a week." The sergeant froze. Her voice was not demanding. It was not angry. It was the quiet, fragile voice of someone struggling not to collapse. The American personnel looked at one another. Nobody spoke, but they all understood the implication. These women were not a threat. They were starving. "Get the cooks," the sergeant muttered. 2 minutes later, a corporal sprinted toward the mess hall. American policy, documented by the U.S. War Department and the Geneva Convention, required all POWs, including women, to receive proper rations immediately. But following the rules was one thing. Witnessing starving people standing before you was something else entirely. Inside the kitchen, huge pots were already boiling for the evening meal. When the corporal burst in and explained the situation, the cooks did not hesitate. "Load the trays now," one ordered. "They eat first." They slapped together what was ready. Biscuits, gravy thick with meat drippings, potatoes, boiled vegetables, cornbread, and hot coffee. It was an improvised feast, but a life-saving one. When the women were led into the mess hall, they stopped in disbelief. They were met with warm air, the smell of real food, the clatter of metal trays, and steam rising from the pots. Some of the women had tears in their eyes, not because the food was rich or luxurious, but simply because it existed. A cook placed the first tray into the hands of the woman who had whispered the truth. She stared at the plate, as if afraid it might disappear. Then she said softly, "This is for us?" The cook nodded firmly. "You eat! No one is taking it from you." What happened next stayed with the American guards for the rest of their lives. The German women didn't dive into the food like animals. They didn't devour it. They straightened their spines, and they ate slowly, carefully, with dignity, despite the desperation visible in every bite. For the first time in days, they felt warmth spreading through their bodies, a shift in perception that went deeper than hunger. After the meal, American medics examined them and found signs of dehydration, exposure, and severe malnourishment. The women expected punishment for being weak. Instead, they were wrapped in blankets and given places to rest. One American nurse remembered later, "These weren't soldiers in that moment. They were just young women who needed help." In the barracks, the stove glowed red. The German women warmed their hands and feet, speaking in low voices, still processing what had just occurred. Nothing in their training had prepared them for kindness from the enemy. Over the next few days, the women settled into POW routines, roll call, work details, and mail checks. But what they remembered most was not the discipline. It was that first night, the warmth, the food, the moment their fear of the Americans began to break. Years later, when some of them gave interviews in Germany, they recalled one thing vividly. The Americans fed us like their own. It wasn't propaganda. It wasn't exaggeration. It was simply what happened. The cooks who ladled gravy onto their plates never saw them again after the war. But those few hours inside a wooden mess hall became a memory carried across a lifetime. A moment when humanity briefly outweighed hatred. A moment when 4 whispered words changed everything. This is a true World War II story, proving that sometimes humanity is a stronger weapon than conventional arms in war. Do you agree? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more true World War II stories.